Hello, welcome to your third lesson of Radio 2. I hope that by now you're starting to take in some of the stuff that I'm saying, starting to listen to some more radio, perhaps getting a bit more insights. So I'm waiting to see your comments and to see what you've been up to with regards to that. So by now, what you should have known, what you should know is you should know why research is needed, why we do research. Why radio stations spend so much time and effort in making sure that they have the correct research. Because without those figures, we don't have much to go on. So apart from the why we need research, you should understand now how we get research and where it is from. So you should understand who the BRC is, what it is that they do, where they come in, perhaps a little bit about SARF, understanding that it was SARF and then BRC, which is where we are now. Then who is listening, understanding a little bit about the listener, understanding about how it is that we get to the listener, and then RAMs, obviously the big one that we did in the previous lesson, RAM, so radio audience measurement, understanding that we have radio diaries and that's what we use in South Africa. That's the method that we have. And understanding how they work, understanding what they do, the kind of data that gets collated in there, and just kind of all the theory that goes along with it. So we had a very intensive session in the previous lesson about all the data and just getting everything together and how it all works. And I understand that I think I kind of might have overwhelmed you, but I hope that by now you realize where it does fit in. Today we're moving along to a more digital side of it. So South Africa uses the paper side of it, okay? Obviously, like we've seen before, but today we're going to look at the method that the USA uses, which is the portable people meter, the PPM. So we're going a little bit digital in this lesson. And along with the PPM, we're going to be looking at digital measurements, how it works, how it's utilized in detail. And then I would like to know if you know all the differences between the different types of research. So that's what we're all going to be getting into today. So that being said, let's find the slides. Okay, so the portable people meter. So the portable people meter is a technological method of recording what respondents in a sample are listening to without those respondents having to fill in a survey either on an app or a paper diary. So this is the methodology that they use in the USA, as mentioned earlier. What it is, the PPM is a pager-like device that is carried around by the respondent at all times, okay? It's never not with you. This thing needs to sleep with you. It's with you 24/7. And through data detection and GPS technology, it can record what radio stations and respondents is being exposed to. Okay, so in a nutshell, what this thing does is, so it's a paper-like device that's always with you and records what you listen to without you having to fill in a survey. Through data direction and GPS technology, it can record what stations the respondent is being exposed to. So radio frequencies sent by these radio stations can be encoded with data that can then be decoded by the PPM. So that's how it kind of gets put together. The PPM has a movement sensor to ensure that it's always on a respondent. So it's like that to make sure that you don't leave it at home and then say that you have it on you and you carry on with your day. It can pick up the date and the times as well as how long you listen to this thing. So this thing is really in depth. So the PPM can tell what the hearer hears, so what you're hearing, the time and the date that you're hearing it, and how long you've been listening to that specific audio. So this is then the same as with the RAM diaries. All the data is then picked up, collated, and weighed up and down to represent a group of people. So yes, you can see it's similar to the diaries here. The main advantage of using this portable people meter is that you don't have to remember what you've listened to, as everything gets recorded automatically. The data is also far more precise in the sense that it can collect up to minute data, whereas RAM paper diaries can only provide an approximation on all quarter hours, based largely on what the listener remembers listening to. There are disadvantages to the PPM though. So you might be looking at this thing going, wow, this thing is amazing. Why aren't we getting this thing? This PPM model that you can just keep on you. I don't need to do anything. It'll track me. It'll track everything automatically and automatically give it through. And then voila, we have immediate data. We'll know immediately who our listeners are. So the disadvantage to this thing is that the PPM measures the most prominent tagged media in the room. Okay, so if you were sitting and listening to the radio, okay, but the television is on in the background, it's going to pick up the TV and not the radio. So it's going to pick up that you were watching television, and it's not going to pick up that whatever you were listening to during that specific time on the radio. So the other thing of the PPM is if you've fallen asleep with it on, and you toss and turn a lot in your sleep, it's still going to pick you up. So it's still going to track that you're listening and that you're moving. So it'll still pick up your movements. So the PPM is also, obviously, it's technology. It's an expensive thing to have. It's an expensive technology. It has to be charged. It's like wearing a Garmin or whatever you want to call it, or a Fitbit. It's something that has to be charged the whole time. It is expensive. And it has to be switched on and off by the wearer. So if you forget to switch it on and you listen to a whole day of radio, it's not going to pick up anything for that whole day. Okay. If you forget to charge it, it's going to be flat and you can't pick up anything. So that's the other side to this thing. It can be quite an investment of your time and your attention or energy if this is something that you decide to commit to, because it is a commitment. Especially since you have to wear this thing for a full year. So while this is still the closest that we've come to measuring the terrestrial signal where radio is concerned, the PPM still has its disadvantages as much as it has its advantages. So it kind of goes both ways. Before we carry on, I want to ask you to sit and think about it. Okay, let's just keep the slide here. If you had a choice between filling in the paper diary, okay, for 7 days and not knowing the results for 3 months, and also not having it in as much detail as you would with the PPM, or on the other side, you can have a portable people meter that you need to carry with you for the year, but you'll have up-to-date, everyday data, okay, which one would you choose and why? So we know that the difference between using diaries and electronic measurements is the immediacy of the data. Initial PPM results have shown that listeners are more fickle than broadcasters have believed. While listeners are loyal to the stations that they like, when they're bored, the loyalty can very quickly shift. Think about yourself when you're driving in your car. If you get bored of a song, what do? I switch the channel. Or if a presenter is speaking and I'm not interested in what they're saying, I'll change the channel. The variety of stations people choose was also a surprise. Typical listeners averaged 6 stations while driving. I think 6 is a bit much, but I do about 2 or 3. And if I do long distance, then it'll be around 6, definitely. They might choose one for music, another one for traffic, yet another for news or talk. I'm sure you do the same. I listen to 702 when I want to listen to talk, and then I have quite a few stations when it comes to music. So these listeners listened to different types of music formats, and most tuned out when they heard long commercial sets, because we now know how quickly the listener tunes out if he or she is bored. The principle of powerful radio, making the content relevant to the listener, is more important than ever. Interestingly, what kept listeners present through a commercial set was if they were told there was a specific feature coming up at a specific time. Just as programmers in the days of diary ratings programmed across the quarter hour to get credit for more time spent listening, programmers are now learning how they can stretch and manipulate listening habits in order to make the PPM work for them. So just thinking about everything that we've just spoken about and just said about the PPM, all the pros and the cons behind it, there's still people that are looking into other ways of usages. So for all these reasons, most of the media businesses around the world are trying to find ways to convert their listeners into users of their digital content streams. So companies are trying to go more digital and to keep their listeners, just to kind of migrate them over. If radio stations can drive their listeners to engage with their content online, they can learn a lot more about how those listeners are consuming and responding to that content. And that's something that is currently being worked on in South Africa. There's a company called Fabric, and they are literally doing this. So they've worked with a station called Izwilo Mzansi in KwaZulu-Natal on specifically this. Okay, obviously it's quite an expensive app because it's built in such an in-depth way for you to get all your stats. But this app can tell you everything about your listeners in detail. You can get so much information out of it. And YFM ran a competition on it last year. I think it was in the beginning of last year, where they got 1 million entries for the competition. So this is literally, stations are trying to get people to engage more from a digital point of view, even though at this point they're trying to take them to social media. So if you can, I would definitely suggest doing some research on Fabric specifically. They also do a lot of webinars. A guy called Jonathan Lumley hosts a lot of them. So if you search Fabric as in Fabrik, it'll definitely pop up. It's part of a company called IM Media that kind of specializes in this kind of stuff. So it's really interesting to see that we're finally starting to head in that direction. So once stations have started driving their listeners to more online content, or to rather to engage with their online content, and they've gotten more information about how their listeners are consuming and listening to their content, the data can then be collected online. So the data that can then be collected online is the radio version of big data, which is richer and has more variety, obviously, than basic data. For example, you'll now have the information of exactly how long someone is listening for, or what show they were listening to. So you can then understand big data in the sense of the 3 V's, which is volume, velocity, and variety. Okay. So the volume of the data is the amount or the size of the data. This can be like, for instance, Twitter, so your Twitter feed or your website feed, or the website journey. If someone goes from opening your website on their computer to opening up your website on their cell phones. So the velocity of the data, so velocity obviously, refers to the rate at which the data is received and acted upon. So how quickly do I get this data and do I do something with this data? So this type of data could include how long it takes someone to make a decision on something, or how long it takes them to purchase a specific product. And then the last of the 3 V's, variety, is the type of data that we refer to that make the big data big. So this is largely what we refer to as unstructured data. So things like the videos and audio that you would want to compare with a bit more structured data to give you a lot more insight into that person. So you can see that if we can get someone to listen to radio online, if you can move your listeners to online, it makes them as audiences much more measurable and much easier trackable. This also makes them way more valuable for advertisers, as big data enables the station to understand their audiences better and better, which is obviously what the advertisers are looking for at the end of the day. They would love to talk one-on-one to their actual audience. So digital content streams on the whole is obviously a way that radio stations are really trying hard to go at the moment. And I think this is something that in time will definitely assist radio stations with their listenership figures, just understanding them better, which means that from a programming point of view, they can then build their programs better and bring in extra revenue. And now moving from that into digital measurement. So when we start looking at digital measurements, firstly, digital data measurement is extremely versatile, and it can range from geolocated data, where a person is listening from, to rich data that contains a media owner's personal info. Don't confuse big data with rich data, okay? So rich data, your personal information can be in there, like for instance, your cell phone numbers, your ID number, your email address, even your social media handles, things like that, okay? Geolocated data, you would have seen there's been a lot of people in trouble in the past with photos being posted with their geolocated data on. Obviously, if you take a photo with your live on, then it can show people your geolocation also. So obviously want to be careful about. But getting back to the rich data, the value of getting this kind of information, so the value of collecting such rich data and cross-referencing it then with other sets of information, which you might already have, is that they can begin to tell stories about the users. Think about it for yourself. If I now have access to all your details, to your social media handles, so I can go and see who you are, what you're interested in, all your information like that, so I can know if you travel, where you're traveling to, what kind of things do you buy? What kind of food do you like eating? Are you a cat person? Are you a dog person? What kind of ads will work for you? So obviously, as you can think about it, if you were an advertiser, this is gold. This is the kind of stuff that you want. Because as an advertiser, you can then understand how to target your audience that you're trying to target. And so you can reach your potential customers because you'll be starting to understand how they think. So the benefit of any content media platform includes a large and varied audience reach, along with being able to tell very detailed stories about their users. This is why Facebook has dominated the social media advertising space. The site has a large amount of users, and they know pretty much everything about those users. If you think about all your information that's on Facebook. So they would know your demographics, your interests, your relationships, your likes, and a lot more other things. The data that they have on users is then used to target particular advertising messages to those users. So the data that, for example, Facebook has on its users is then used to target particular advertising messages to those users and prevent the advertiser from spending money on users who would not be receptive to the message. In advertising, this is called wastage. So where Facebook is different then, obviously, from radio, is that they can tell you who exactly you should be targeting for the type of advert that you want to place. Whereas on radio, it's not for a specific person, it's for the whole audience, the whole listenership. So wastage would still occur on radio stations, unfortunately. When we start looking at terrestrial radio stations, the biggest problem that they sit with is that the data that they can collect from their users is limited. So they have very limited amounts of data. RAM diaries give them basic information, but they can't give them the granular data that, for example, Facebook can, as they don't collect the more granular information that Facebook does. So if you think about it, I guess it makes sense that advertisers who are looking for particular users will go to platforms that can guarantee their adverts are being seen by the correct people. That's the reason that a lot of people go to Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or even TikTok these days. In order for terrestrial radio stations and audio creators to keep making money off advertising and for them to compete with the major global technology and digital companies, they'll need to move many of their users over to digital platforms where they'll be able to begin to obtain more detailed information about them and obviously then about the kind of audio that they'll consume also. So there are a few things that can happen now. Once a user migrates from the terrestrial audio platform to a digital audio platform, the station can incentivize that user to log into their app or their website and begin to share more detailed information about them. The interaction then with your app or your website can help the radio station see what you like and what you don't like, as well as obviously when you are disconnecting from it. Again, this is something that Fabric will be able to do. The other thing that they'll be able to do is they'll be able to track what their users' downloading or streaming habits might be. And this is another way of being able to personalize it a bit more, or rather to help them customize and personalize their audio products. And that's another way of perhaps getting them back and keeping them to stay on longer and more frequently. So think about it. This is a whole new world that we're dabbling in at the moment. What's happening now is digital migration and registered users offer media companies data that was previously completely inaccessible. This is now put companies in a space where they can better understand their users and then sell these users back to the advertisers to be paid for it. This process would then minimize wastage, which is what we're trying to do at the end of the day. The key, however, is to get these users to sign up or to log in to access the content from the media owner. One critical aspect to remember about digital data is that if stations can incentivize users to give them more data, their data offerings can be much more valuable to clients and they can make better content decisions for their listeners at the end of the day. Another important source of data is the social network platforms of the radio stations themselves. Each radio station utilizes social media platforms to share, advertise, and promote content and to engage with their listeners. These pages are monitored, populated, and managed by the radio station staff themselves, and they can be rich sources of information that helps to tell better stories about the listeners and their communities. At the end of the day, the aim for all media businesses must be to grow their digital and social media users. This is the only way that we'll be able to gather more granular and useful data about our users. Otherwise, we're only going to sit with the same information that we've had. Think about the radio stations that you follow. I'm sure most of them are extremely active on their social media pages. And at one point or another, I'm sure you might have engaged with them. So if you look at the textbook on page 429, there's an example of an analysis of information a station can source from their active Facebook and Twitter users. So this social media report specifically showed that they had quite a young audience, so 15 to 24. Second largest was 25 to 34. So this is obviously a youth radio station. Audience was 66% female. Okay, so you could get quite a breakdown of it to see where they're based. You know that the users are concerned with their career, with property renting and buying, with car buying, investing, starting a family, holidays, entertainment and friends, music, movies and series, and making money. You know that they want to know about the government, law, politics, etc., etc. You understand that they have the latest technology and devices. I'm an Apple fan, by the way. But yeah, so you're starting to get a bigger picture about them because you have your main content interests, and then on your other side, you have your granular topics. So you can go a lot more in depth here. So if I think about the radio stations that I worked with when I was still at the advertising agency and even my company that I run now, we work with about 90 radio stations and their listenership figures are massive. These stations are growing their audiences on all their platforms. and it is a way that we are starting to engage with them a lot more, is by utilizing those social media pages. So if we take all of this together in summary, the future of digital radio is to use digital measurement data to enable radio programmers to understand each listener. This is so important. This is 100% the way that we're going. Through this data mining, station management will be able to target individuals directly. So I can sell you exactly what it is that you want. They'll then be able to substitute music for more preferred customized playlists and be better able to understand their target markets through their other web-based activity and use of social media and e-commerce. So this is kind of what the future of digital radio will look like. All right, so that brings us to the end of looking at the digital measurement section for now. So that means we've now covered BRC RAM, we've covered PPM, and we've covered digital measurement. What I'd like you to do now is to think about BRC and to think about PPM. Firstly, what do they stand for? What do they do? Secondly, okay, in detail. So obviously 1, paper diaries, 1, technological little thing like a pager device. And I want you to think about them in terms of differences and similarities. What are the differences and the similarities? So the difference with, so one example, for instance, here under BRC versus PPM differences, BRC has quarterly results, PPM has immediate results. BRC, it's paper, PPM, pager-like device. BRC, you write down 7 days worth of listening. PPM monitors it for a year. Okay, I want you to keep doing that because obviously there are more, and I want you to think about this in detail, and then I want you to think about the similarities. I didn't put anything in there yet because this is actually something I want you to do and to think about and to go and sit and do. But one example, let me just help you a little bit, would be, for instance, the data is picked up, collated, and weighed up and down to represent a group of people. Okay, that's one similarity between them. So that's just something I want you to think about in detail. Is this something we would have done if we were all in class together? Obviously, we're not. So now it's becoming you do it. Then lastly, what I want you to do, yes, unfortunately, it's homework. If we were in class together, then we would be doing this together, but now it's for you to do, please. For you to do. If you go to page 427, there's a section at the bottom called Activity 11B. I want you to answer both of these, please, and send these through to me. So the first one that you're going to answer is to provide an innovative idea to get listeners to move from listening on an FM radio station or platform to a radio station's mobile app. Explain how you plan to entice the users to log into the app and to provide their email address and cell phone number. And number 2, discuss the advantages and disadvantages of utilizing PPM technology in South Africa. Consider how PPM measurements would differ. Consider how PPM measurements would differ from the current paper radio diaries that are in use. So the idea is just to get you thinking about what other options do we have in South Africa, especially now with regards to COVID and not having had any stats for almost a year. Okay, so I want you to do that as well. And then that's that. Then I'll see you for our next class.